welcome to Fine is a Four-Letter Word. My guest this week, Kathryn Mayer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am thrilled to have you, and I am thankful to Wendy Koch, a past guest, for introducing us.
Me too. Wendy's awesome. She's a rock star.
She absolutely is. I'll have to put a link to her show in the show notes for this.
Yes,
so people can
definitely
go back and listen.
Mm-hmm.
I love starting the show with this question, and it is, what were the values and beliefs that you were raised with that contributed to you becoming who you are?
So I think, that's where this idea of perfectionism started, right? Of course, you have to blame your mother.
Right. She gets blamed for everything.
Full blame. It is really probably the top three were you've got to work hard. You've got to do things well. If you're going to do something, do it well. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Mm.
And then really work is really where your identity comes from. That I would link to my father.
Wow. That is some challenging, like, I could see how that would create the issues that we're going to get into talking about. And, it's not uncommon that I hear so many people were raised with the value that hard work is important.
Yes.
I find it particularly interesting for you, though, that the do well or it's not worth doing.
Yeah. That was a very strong value, that my mother taught us is really, and I think the good of that is she had 5 children. I'm the oldest of 5. And she believed that the key was to find something that everybody could be good at. So I tried a lot of things. I was tall. I tried ballet. I was the worst, dancer ever. I could skip backwards. That was like my highlight. I tried gymnastics. My legs were too long. People were like, oh, no, it's a disaster. And then I found tennis. Luckily at the time when I grew up in Baltimore, tennis was hot. And so I started playing and I was immediately good at it. So my mother was like, okay, so tennis is going to be your thing, and that means you have to take lessons regularly. And I also want you to play tournaments because if we're going to spend money on lessons, because there weren't a lot of resources and I could only take half-hour lessons, but it was worth it to spend money on a half-hour private lesson versus doing group lessons because she thought you'll get better faster. And then if you're going to spend money on that, I want you to play tournaments because that will test and help you to continue to grow.
Okay, right. So if you're going to play, this is not just for fun.
No, this is not just for fun. No, that's not what this is about. No.
Wow.
You want to do other things for fun, fine, play tag, play badminton, we played other. But if you're going to do this thing, tennis, what you want to be good at, this is to be good at it.
Okay. And how did that develop? Did you become good at it? Or were you winning tournaments?
I became good at it. Yeah. I won tournaments. Right. I started winning tournaments right away, which was super fun, of course, until I hit like 13 or 14 when things started to become more serious. And the big challenge for me is I had won a lot of tournaments because I was tall and my coach was like, run to the net. You'll scare the girls, wave your racket. You're like 6 inches taller than most of them, So that worked well until you get to 13, 14. Then they caught up. And my coach was like, well, you're going to have to change your strategy. And in my infinite wisdom of 13 and 14, I thought, well, why would I want to do that? I'm winning. What do I know? So, of course, I didn't listen to the coach because winning really had become my identity. And I didn't know enough to understand that the coach, of course, was right. And what really pains me is that I didn't really have the tools then to transition and say, oh, well, now what? So what I did was really my singles career sort of came to a standstill. It really didn't continue. And I decided to play doubles because the serving and volleying, the skills that I'd learned was more valuable there. So I became a really good doubles player, but my joy for the sport really kind of went down a fair amount.
Yeah, you hear that a lot about professional athletes. Like they played when they were in high school or college, they played for fun.
Right.
It was fun to play. And then once they become professional, it's not, they're playing for money and it's not really as fun.
That's not as fun. Yeah. And that's what this was fun until then it became winning. And then winning became my identity. And I didn't have the tools, and sports psychology wasn't even a thing then,
Yeah.
to help me realize. I started having performance anxiety, of like if I was supposed to win, I'd get nervous because I thought if I lose, that's, I didn't know
Yeah.
how to manage it. And so that's when it really became not fun anymore.
Yeah. You see that kind of in business too,
Mm-hmm.
when people start overthinking and
Right.
thinking, oh, what if I screw this up? And then that's the predominant thought in your head. And then of course that's what you do, because that's where your focus is.
Right.
It's like, if you're looking in that direction, that's the direction you're going to go.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah.
Right.
I'm always amazed at, I'm a college football fan.
Mm,
When they throw an interception and then they have to come back in and go through another play, they have to erase that from their head and go, all right, this is a totally new play. Doesn't
yeah.
matter what
They
happened
say
5 seconds ago. And it's
say
the same
athletes have to
really
have
in
short
any
memories.
sport and
Yeah.
in life as well. Like, not that you don't learn from your mistakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But how do you not let that hold you down and back from the next play?
Yeah. It's very difficult. I mean, there are sports psychology tools, which I learned much later in life, but at
Mm.
that stage in life, no, I had no tools, and no one really. The title of your show, I felt fine. I didn't know how to be vulnerable, so I was like, oh
Yeah.
well, I guess I'm fine. I'll just play doubles. I'll end that, as opposed to just saying I have no clue how to deal with this.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, how could you at that age, for one thing?
No,
And because even as adults, people don't know how to change their identity. Like,
right, and I had no idea how to change my identity,
how do
and
you
I didn't even know it had
evolve?
become. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Right. And so how did this, what was the relationship then with your mother if your purpose was to excel and you weren't excelling anymore?
Well, the quirky thing about my mother is she actually didn't care about how I did in tournaments, which was,
Oh, wow. Okay.
she didn't. She wasn't one of those mothers. In fact, it was really the opposite. She was like, "Oh well, she didn't. She just thought, well, you're doing this well. You're really good." And I was like, I had actually become more like my father. So my father was
Mm.
very successful. Um, Neurologist. He was a professor. And so I really went to imitating her because my mother really was more of a homemaker. She was
Mhm.
a volunteer, but with all the kids, and one of my siblings had special needs, she had stopped working. So the role model really became my father, which I don't think my mother really understood that
Mhm.
was
Okay.
happening, nor did I really kind of understand
Sure.
that either. So it was fine with her, but it was fine, but it wasn't, and that I was expecting that she was going to be a little more supportive and encouraging of my tennis career, and in fact, she
Mhm.
wasn't.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
And so then how did this need to be perfect, which you mentioned being the oldest, is, I
yeah,
think,
it's
even more
common.
ingrained in us
Hmm.
than maybe younger siblings
Hmm. Hmm.
in the
Yes.
traditional stereotype.
Hmm. Hmm.
How did that follow you through your career?
So then what happened was, and I went, I really did want to kind of continue my career, my tennis playing, but I realized I couldn't manage that. So I wanted to play in college, but my parents were definitely not supportive of that. They were intellectuals. They thought the purpose of college is to learn, not to
Mm.
play sports. So that crushed that. So I went to a college, and there was third division tennis, which I played for a couple years, but it really wasn't that inspiring. So what happened was then I just really went to do as well as I could, like to get A's, and I was an honor roll and all that. But I still had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. So the the way it was resolved was by seeking out help. So the thing that I had learned from my mother is to do things well, right? And that involves seeking out coaching. And that I think was
Mm.
probably one of the most important lessons. So what I did was when I graduated from college, I sought out career coaching because I had no idea I didn't want to work in the tennis field, and I had no idea what to do differently. So I went through an extensive career coaching process, and identified like talent management HR roles would be a good way to combine, my competitiveness and my coaching, which I really, really loved. Because I'd gotten a master's degree in psychology in the interim and tried several different careers, which all of them, which I hated. And so I was like, because they were in the nonprofit, they were in schools, they were, different things. And I was like, no, I need competitiveness. And that's what this career counseling process helped me with. And eventually, after like 3 years, which was really a hard process to go through as a perfectionist, like I had enough rejections to cover my walls with,
Mm.
with rejection letters. But the stick-to-itiveness that I have, which you gain to be good at anything, I stuck with it, and eventually I got a job and moved to New York City, in
There's
talent
something to
management
be
in a large
said.
bank.
There's something to be said for doing things that don't work out
Hmm. Hmm.
and for discovering what you don't like.
Right. And I had a long list of those things
Mm-hmm.
by the time I was in my late 20s, which then I didn't appreciate. Then I thought I
Right.
was a failure. I honestly really thought I was just a failure. Everybody else was getting good jobs. They were doing this. And I was like, well, I've tried 4 or 5 careers and I'm only 26. We're talking, this was the 1980s. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
really a hip thing to do that. You were sort
Right.
of like, what's
Yeah.
wrong with this person?
Yeah.
Today, of course, everybody does that, but not then.
Mm-hmm.
So I really felt like I was a failure until finally I got what I thought was a job of my dreams, where I was working in this large bank, designing and running training programs, and I just loved it. But I was 28 by then,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so it had been through many years and lots of rejection, um, to get there.
But you finally found what you loved.
I did. Oh yes, because I was determined. I think one of the things about being good at tennis, I learned that if you want to get good at something, again, you have to work hard. You have to, take those lessons and be serious and challenge yourself. The tennis tournaments, I did win a lot of tournaments, but of course I lost a lot too. Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you realize that the only way you get better is you have to challenge yourself.
Yeah. That's a good key point.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it was a good key point that kept me going, despite the fact that I really did feel like a failure. you know.
Yeah.
Um,
How did you then come to write your book about perfectionism?
So, I mean, that was something I'd also, part of my career counseling work was they made you do a 40-year plan. So you're 23
A
years old, you're doing a
40-year
40-year
plan?
plan, a 40-year plan. And I've
Like
actually lived that
40.
40-year plan. 40. Yeah, 40.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Right.
can barely
And
know
that
what I'm
also
doing
was
in
really
4
weird.
months, but okay.
Right. I know, right? You're 23, you're like, oh, 40-year plan. Like, wow, like what the heck is that? But we did
I'm going to
it.
be really
And part of
old
my
by then.
right, like, oh, I'm gonna be really old. Yeah, so you can't sort of fathom it, but it's pretty fun to do it, right? Because you're like, oh, wow, what do I want to do with my life? Wow. And one of the things was to eventually have my own business, which I've had, and to write books. I always had
Mm.
this interest in writing, even though I didn't do really much writing in college or anything. I was just kind of like, oh, where'd that come from? But I've always enjoyed it, and so um, I've written this perfectionist book is my third book. The first one was about me and competition, my
Mm.
struggle with competition. The second I wrote during the COVID thing, of how to survive that and not lose your mind. And this third one is about sort of putting it all together of what does it look like? Because it's taken me a while to figure out, what does it look like to be a productive perfectionist? What does that mean? I now have the wisdom and the kind of the years to look back and say, oh, now I understand.
You just used the term productive perfectionist. Is
Yes,
that what? Okay.
perfectionist,
I just
right?
want to make sure
Yes,
I heard that
that's
correctly
that's the
because,
that's the term. That's the
oh,
title.
that's the name
Yes,
of the
productive
book.
perfect. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Because that's interesting.
right.
Productive perfectionist.
Perfect, right. Versus the perfectionist that just has the fist in the back, and I think that's what I've had mostly, is like the fist in the back, to look perfect, to do the right thing, to just say, oh, everything's fine, when in fact it's not fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
So what's I mean, obviously we're going to have to read the book and we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But how do you like what's one thing for becoming a productive perfectionist?
Probably one of the biggest things is you've got to become aware of these shoulds. Most of us
Mm.
perfectionists have these standards, like I should keep playing tennis, because I'm good, or I should pursue this career because I got this degree or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, it's not. Maybe it served me at one point, but it's not serving me anymore. And that was like really one of my biggest sort of learnings and I see it a lot in my clients that I work with, is I should be doing this. Like, can I share a little story?
Absolutely.
Okay. So one of the ways this really became apparent to me was a few years ago, my husband and I have taken vacations. We like to travel. And we took this biking vacation in Cambodia. And right when you think biking vacation for Cambodia, it's probably not the best idea because a lot of the roads were not that great. And we took it, and it was sunny and hot. So we see Angkor Wat, which is a very famous place. If you've
Mm-hmm.
seen any of the, I'm blanking on the name of the movies, but it'll come to me. But it's in a lot of movies, very famous. That was great. But then we go out to the countryside, and it's like 90, 100 degrees. The roads are dusty, rocky. By midday on the first day, I'm miserable. I'm crying. I'm yelling, and of course, blaming my husband because, of course, it's his fault that he wanted to drag me on this trip.
This was your freaking idea.
Exactly. What was I thinking? We're like 50 years old and early 50s. Like, what is this? And my husband looks at me. He's like, you're going to have to find a way to get happy because we're here, or, maybe you have to go home. And I was like thinking, So I go back to my journal, and I've been journaling forever. And so I'm writing in my journal, and I'm crying, and I'm writing. And all of a sudden I realized I have these shoulds. Like, I should be able to tough it out. I'm a competitive athlete. I should be able to tough it out. And I paid for this torture. I should just tough it out. Just do it. Right. And I start reflecting, and I think, really? Like, okay, that served me to be a competitive athlete when I was, but I haven't done that for, like, I don't know, 15 years, maybe 20 years. So it's like, that's not working for me. And yes, I paid for this, but does that mean I have to torture myself? And all of a sudden I had this light bulb went out. It was like, okay, these shoulds have been living in me. They're unconscious. And I'm just gonna reframe them and change them. And I was like, I'm no longer a competitive athlete. The point of vacation is to enjoy it. And I don't have to prove anything to anybody at this point. So I just decided I would ride if it seemed nice. And otherwise I'd ride in the van that followed the bikers, and I would just choose to enjoy myself
Mm-hmm.
and not be pressured by that peer pressure, because everybody else, there were other, like, these, everybody, was like, oh, gun ho. And of course I had to be on the trip with some, very hardy Australians who were like, oh, we're just going to tough through, and it's like, oh, so I'm the only one that was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But it was so life sort of changing because I realized
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Nobody's making up the rules except you.
Except me, right? and
Yeah.
and and so that was really just an incredible story that really kind of helped me sort of write the book, because it's sort of like one of the later chapters, and realize that you have to lighten up on yourself and look at these
Yes.
standards and ask yourself, are they serving you? And if not, you can change them, and ask what would serve you better at this point in time.
Right. What would serve you better? I love that. I'm
Yeah.
curious, did anybody else on this trip do what you did and stop biking through the no,
Nope.
just okay.
Nobody.
I
It
mean,
was
not that
just
it makes
me.
it any different. I was just wondering
Yeah.
if anybody else, once you gave yourself permission, if that also then gave somebody else permission. Because sometimes
No,
that would
they
happen.
sometimes that did. I mean, all of them didn't ride for like one day because the conditions were so horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
They for like one day, but mostly everybody just toughed it through. And at the end of every day, they would say, "Oh, can you believe that?" And they're like, "What did you do, Catherine?" I said, "Well, I napped.
Mm-hmm.
Then I napped. Then I had a little break. We saw a little whatever. We saw this. We had lunch with all of you, and I napped again. And they're like, oh,
Right. But
oh.
you enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it. I had a
That's the
really
thing.
nice time. And that was
Mm-hmm.
the thing. And that for me was a revelation that even though there may be standards that are set by other people or that you've inherited, you can actually change them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the empowering moment for myself.
Yeah, I love that. And we can always evolve and change. Like
Yes.
nothing is set in stone.
No, no,
And
no.
that's,
And
yeah, I
that's
mean, that's a
the
revelation.
it is a revelation. And that's where I think I've really been it just sort of changed me. I was like, wow, and I tell the story again and again because most people are like, oh yeah, oh, and realizing the power that in every moment you can decide, okay, do I have to, like, I'm going to give a talk for business school students who are soon to graduate through college. And I remember I mentored a young woman, and she was like, her parents were like, well, you majored in finance. You should get a job in a bank. And she's like,
Mm.
oh, yes, I should. She never wanted to get a job at a bank. She took this job at a bank because her parents said, she should. She majored in finance. She lasted like 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and then she left and has created a whole different career being an entrepreneur, doing something very different. But that should is really strong.
Yes. Yeah. At all ages, not just in young people.
Exactly. And
It's
yes.
always because I don't know how we pick it up. Parents, society,
It
whatever it
just
is,
kind
it's
of,
like,
right.
well, and especially when it's tied to money,
Yes, and it's right,
money that's
especially a
spent.
vacation or whatever,
Yeah,
anything,
vacation, education, even
education.
food. Like I bought
Mm,
this, I don't really
right.
like it, but I'm reluctant to throw it out because I paid for it. So let me just finish eating it. And
Right. That's a great. It's as simple as that, right? It's so
so
ingrained in us, and
silly.
and I also think my book is also focused on women. I mean, women and men, both suffer from this, but I think women have more of the perfectionist thing because that's how we survived the millennia. I mean, think of it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't until the 1970s women could get a credit card. And up until then, the pleasing, being perfect. There's
Mm-hmm.
research that shows that women get rewarded for being perfect in schools, and they still tend to do better than men in terms of getting A's. And, so all that's kind of ingrained in our
Yeah.
gender, I think, in our
Yeah.
society.
Absolutely, it is. When we started this recording, I noticed behind you there are hula hoops, and you said those were related to your perfectionism. So I have to ask how.
How? So the funny story about these was that during the pandemic, I live in New York City. It was pretty bleak during the early days of the pandemic. It was also spring. It was like, okay, how am I going to get some exercise? And I had attended a workshop at Omega Institute like the year before, and they had somebody, these women come that sold hula hoops, and I'd always sort of liked hula hooping as a child, but I tried like my niece's hula hoop, and it's like really skinny, and you can't hula hoop, but
Mm-hmm.
they had adult ones, which is like the pink one and the blue one, which were big, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. So I had bought one, and it kind of sat there for a while, but during the pandemic, I was like, oh, this is it. So I started going up on the roof and hula hooping a lot. That was like became part of my daily
Okay.
routine,
All right.
to get some exercise. And then I realized it could also help me break the perfectionism. So, if you have a tough day or things aren't going well or you're mad at yourself, you have this negative should thought, I would hula hoop for just 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and it would get me out of that. I'd go back to that child playfulness, and that physicality and that playfulness helped break some of those negative thoughts. So it actually has become like a key thing that I recommend. And obviously, I've tried different hula hoops. I'm going to experiment with some more because I think it's something everybody can do, right? If I can do
Yes.
it in my little New York City apartment for 3 minutes, it's certainly more fun than walking around the block or something else. and
Yeah.
and dancing is also fun, but it's super fun and easy.
Yeah. I love that. I would have never thought of that.
I
And that is so cool. I'm glad you shared that with us. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it's kind of become my tribute, and that's why I have it in my Zoom called. So people it's rare. A lot of people don't even notice it, which is
Uh-huh.
also interesting. Like it's
Do
part of
you
it if I
remember
notice, if people notice it.
do you remember those Richard Scarry books when we were kids? Did you ever have those? Richard
No, I don't
Scarry, he
think
wrote
so.
one of them that I remember is it's called What Do People Do All Day? And he had these little animal characters and they were like
Yes.
humans, but they all
Yes.
had human things. And they were so intricately illustrated. And I would
I think
sit
I do.
and
Yeah.
stare at those books for hours. I was looking
Mm.
at every single detail and every animal, every situation. So it is not at all surprising that I would take in what's going on in your background, is all my point.
Ah, that makes sense, though. Yeah, that makes sense that you notice. But I do think that's really important because a lot of people don't notice. Well, you notice, you listen. Um, but yeah, the hula hooping thing I think is just super fun, super accessible. And I think for perfectionists, we definitely need something that breaks that negativity because perfectionism gets you into this negative sort of victim mindset, fist in the back, not good enough. Not good enough is our big story.
Yeah.
And you need things to break it. I mean, obviously changing your thought patterns takes time. Um, but also I think the physicality of doing some things that lighten you up and that's why I think as we had mentioned that's also at one point in my career I had a boss that said I needed to lighten up because I was
Mm.
really frustrated with things that were happening and he said, why don't you try going to clown school. and, and, you know
Okay, there's
and
an idea that you don't hear every day.
and well, he had actually been a clown at Ringling Brothers during college. Like it was one of his college jobs.
Okay,
He
all
was
right.
he was a really out there guy. You know,
So, all right.
and
So lightening up wasn't an issue for him, but he saw it in you.
he thought I needed to lighten up. And so I said, okay, so I tried this. I went to this clown workshop for a weekend, a long weekend, and I don't know if you know anything about clown workshops, but there are two types of clown
I do
workshops.
not.
There's the American, I didn't know this either, but there's the American Clown School, which is like, you put on the big shoes and the hats and all the props and you learn tricks kind of related to that. And then there's a European Clown School, which is you develop a clown personality.
Okay.
And that begins by looking at how you walk. So
Okay.
I went to the European Clown School model, which of course I didn't know. But this woman was trained in France. And so she began the workshop by saying, we all had to walk like along the runway. And then we'll look at how you walk and we'll create a clown character. Now, of course, I walked perfectly.
I'm just imagining this in my head. Okay.
So you see where this is going, right? Everybody else had a limp. They had something wrong with their walk. I had nothing wrong. Everybody looks at me and I'm like thinking, I am flunking out of clown school. I am not, there's nothing funny about walking perfectly. It's just not funny.
Did they
And so the
naturally
woman
walk with a
goes,
limp or did they like incorporate it into their clown persona?
I don't know.
Oh,
All these
okay.
women had something wrong with their walk. Every single
Okay.
one had something wrong with their walk, but my walk. There was nothing
Okay.
wrong with my walk. And everybody just sort of stared at me.
Okay.
And the woman was like, well, you're really tall. And luckily, after I had finished the whole thing, I think I tripped later or something happened. Like I tripped and they're like, oh, that's it. You're going to be like this tall person that your clothes will be too short and then you trip. I'm like, okay, great. As long as it's something, anything that people can laugh. So I became Sassy the clown that had clothes that were too short and she tripped on occasion.
All right. Wow. That is so interesting. And now I'm so intrigued by clown school.
I know.
I'm like, wait, maybe that could be fun. I don't know.
There are a lot of clown workshops. I'd like to take another one, but there are, because I've hired people that are in the, former actors and stuff to help me with presentations. And so there are those around. I would love to do it again because I do think there's something to it, especially for us perfectionist types that
Yeah.
takes ourselves way too seriously. It was so helpful for me to realized I wasn't funny, and that actually my boss was right, that I was part of the problem. I need to lighten up about myself and stop
Uh-huh.
taking myself so seriously all the time, you know?
Yeah. A
Um,
lot of us could benefit from that.
yeah, yeah. So, and that actually led me also, I've done a lot of work, improvisation training. I think if you want to take that, to me is where I've recommended that to a lot of people and clients, because improvisation really did change my life. It helped me lighten up a little bit.
Mm.
Um, yeah, yeah,
I remember improv can be a little scary. And at the same
hmm
time,
hmm
that it is very useful and helpful. I used to be part of
mm.
Toastmasters, and there's a section
I've
in
done that
Toastmasters
too.
meetings where you have what's it
Yes,
called? Where you're doing improv answering of questions.
table
Table
topics, table
topics, right.
topics.
Right.
Yep,
And
hmm
I used to
yep.
at the beginning I was so scared of it. And then by the time
Mm.
after a while, I was like, yeah, bring it. Give me a question.
That's right. Bring it on, right? But that's, I can see you're really good at it. Yeah, I probably was terrible at that for quite some time,
Well, I
years
was too
probably.
until I learned how to not be so
Yeah.
terrible. Uh, wow, this has been such a good conversation, and we didn't even get into one of the other questions that I wanted to ask you because we had talked about it in the pre-show was about the comfort zone shrinking as we get older. So,
Mm.
maybe we can touch on that for just a second because you had made a
Sure.
comment that you think that is what happens, and I
Yes.
actually think it may expand. What's your theory?
I think my theory is that most, well, not most, a lot of, for what happens to a lot of people, especially of those with perfectionist tendencies, is we want to get good at things, so we stay in a narrow zone.
Mhm.
And unless you deliberately force yourself to try different things and break out of it, it's gonna shrink. So
Mm.
meaning, am I gonna really try something new? How many, there's lots of written about how many of us try new things as we get older and older. And so, but I do think if you start doing little things, such as going to a clown school or taking an improv class or going Toastmasters or hula hooping, any of these little things, it actually does expand because wisdom is really an expansion of the comfort zone. You're like, oh, I can do that, or it's not so bad if I fail, or I can try that because I've tried something new before. So to me, the goal of life is to keep expanding your comfort zone. That's a big
Mhm.
part of why I'm passionate about this work around the productive perfectionist, and is because I want to keep expanding my comfort zone. But that little perfectionist thing that sits on my shoulder, like, no, no, stay inside. You want to be good at this, whereas I'm like, no, no, I want to expand. I don't want to be like this little
Yeah.
person that stays in a narrow lane. I want to live a large life where mistakes and new adventures and things that I've never tried before are part of my life. But um, so that's why for me, I have to keep like pushing myself a little bit. To
Yeah.
keep expanding my zone.
I love that. And I can see how that happens to people. And at the same time, I think as we get older, sometimes not a lot, we get more confidence in ourselves. And so
Yes,
we
I
are
would totally agree
more
with that.
likely to try something that we have never done before because
Yes,
we feel more confident in who we are. We've grown into more who we
yes,
are. So I can see both sides of this coin.
yeah, and I think that's a great point. I think that's the real goal. Except I think for folks, if you get trapped of just only doing things that you're good at, that's the
Yes.
versus just saying, let me just try something. Like African dancing, whatever. That was actually one of my keys to breaking out of perfectionism in college. When I stopped playing tennis, I took African dancing because I thought I wanted to just try something different. And
Uh-huh.
part of the reason I love the music, but I was so terrible. I was like the worst,
Well,
but it was
that's
fun.
another piece is that you have to be willing to be terrible.
Yes, yes.
And so many of us as perfectionists are not willing to be.
No, we're
I've
not
heard
willing.
so many people, myself included in the past, say, I don't want to be a beginner. I hate being a
Hmm.
beginner because I just want to be good
Right.
at it. And
Yes.
that's kind of impossible. So
You have to enjoy the process. That's the
Yeah.
big thing. You have to enjoy the process. And that for me, I learned that through that dance class, improvisation, the hula hooping reminds me you just have to kind of enjoy it a little bit more.
Yes. Yes. That is
But I
really
think your points are good ones.
the
Yeah.
goal
The
of
goal
life.
is to keep expanding. Yes,
Keep
because that
expanding
confidence.
and
Yes.
keep enjoying.
Yes, both.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
It's possible. It's not a one or the other.
No, it's not a zero sum game. And that's really what my book, The Productive Perfection, is about, and my mission as a coach and stuff is to, if you can keep expanding and enjoying the process and learn different ways, such as letting go of those shoulds, reframing those shoulds, doing little exercises to get you out of that your head,
Mm-hmm.
that will help you be in the moment more, enjoy more. But it is something you have to actively manage. I
Yes.
think that's
Yes. Thank you so much. Before we
my
go,
pleasure. Thank you.
what
Yes.
is the song that you listen to when you need an extra boost of energy? Maybe you're listening to it when you're hula hooping. What's your song?
I love that song "I'm Coming Out" by Diana Ross.
Oh, yeah, that's a
So,
good one.
I love
That is
that one. I don't know.
such a good one to
Yeah.
just like scream out at the top of your lungs.
Yes, yes. It's sort of like I'm coming out. It's kind of like freeing, and that's sort of like
Yeah,
my yeah.
I love it. Okay. And lastly, if someone wants to continue a conversation with you, how is the best way to do that?
I would say just reach out to me on my website www.kcmayer.com.
Okay.
So
I will put a link.
www.kcmayer.com. Yep. Just put that link in there. They can sign up, send me an email from there. Yeah, I'd love to continue. But I really appreciate
Fantastic.
this, Laura. This is such a fun conversation.
It really was. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for
You're welcome.
showing up for fine is a 4-letter word.
Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day.